G'day folks, just a couple of recaps today. I'm just going to add this on to my shipping news number 13, which actually technically means that we're a whole 1 year old. This is not a particularly deep dive, the story. We will actually get into it later on, so we're just going to mark this in the open diary. You might have known of the two cases of the two children that were found in the suitcases in Manawara. News Hub has just reported that the woman's been arrested and is hiding out in a Korean company apartment owned by metal companies, by a metal company, which is, the company itself is called, basically, it's actually called Korean Zinc. Now, what I'm finding quite interesting about this, I said this is not a deep dive, but what I'm finding quite interested on this from just having a little look at the company itself is a lot of very, very familiar characters. So first of all, they're actually involved in a big, huge hydrogen plan for Queensland's coal, basically using coal to make hydrogen, very much like they're going to plan to use iron sands in New Zealand to act as a catalyst to use hydrogen in New Zealand. In the New Zealand case, not very green. In the coal case, I don't really know. Then there's a little piece there about basically the memorandum of understanding behind this Australian aspect of it. The Hans Ho Australian Hydrogen Consortium MOU. A little bit confused about that one because the date of all these guys standing there holding the little memorandum of understanding with Australians in the middle, Korean flag on one side, and the New Zealand flag on the other is actually dated about September the 22nd. I'm looking at my clock right now. It says the 2nd of the 16th of September 2022. So I'm not sure what's happening with the time zones here. I always think anything about South Korea, and same with Japan, as I always tend to think, Moonies, and it reminds me about all the stuff that went on in Perth in Australia in 1995, and the Sarin cult, which a lot of people often said that they've actually got an overlap with those particular, the Moonies and the cult that carried out the Sarin attack. That's not related to any of these things, issues, but I just kind of raise it up there while I'm looking through. There's some quite good documents in there about that consortium raised in 1997 in the document of Parliament of Australia. But this is where I find it's getting quite interesting, is that when you start to look into it, the first thing is you find is that this company is actually listed as being one of the companies on the blacklist list, largely designed for helping shady Russians get materials used for weapons of mass destructions. And again, what that's looking at, very recently, there's been another case here coming up where basically weapons, basically the Russians are using, turns out the Western companies are helping them supply the electronics. And this company is actually involved in that field too. It's been a long-running story. In fact, something that's been sort of picking up very much again, the links of people that are sort of nationalists in Russia that Putin was friendly with, but that they were also, those nationalists were very much tied up to banks in Italy, tied up with the P2 affair, and actually linked more recently to back to the Vatican Bank. And basically about a few years ago, see, this is not the deep dive, so don't hold me for the dates, but a few years before all the stuff took place right now, was that they actually found that there was actually a weapons smuggling ring linked into this event that was actually happening with, supposedly allies of Putin, in the context that anybody dealing with Russia actually has to get along with Putin. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're his friends, but you kind of fairly self-explanatory. And those people and the corrupt Ukrainians, and of course the usual P2, that's the hard right organisation that owes its roots right back to Odessa, the organisation that came out of the fall of World War II, that basically had a bunch of hardcore fanatical Nazis going, nope, we haven't finished. We've lost the battle, but we haven't finished the war. And again, what we're finding is, so that does touch base on things that probably do need a deeper dive, which is a lot of these weapons or money that's arriving in Ukraine designed to support the Ukrainian Nazis, and they are Nazis or the Ukrainian forces, but of which there are large amounts of Nazi factions involved. Anyone that's the common secret. Everyone's going to they either don't talk about it or you know about it, but no one denies that there are Nazis in the Ukraine. So in New Zealand, you're not allowed to be affiliated in any way with anything being slightly not centrist beyond. You can be a centre leftist and have a friend who is a centre-rightist, and suddenly you're affiliated with, right-wing supreme, and it goes both ways. So I'm not really picking on anything, but I'm just saying there is a bit of a double standard going on there. So this group of blacklisted Russians, the Koreans, what that does is immediately brings up, of course, all of this. My books were basically about the proliferation of nuclear weapons worldwide, almost to the point that everybody's got and I do wonder sometimes if that's the intention, that the idea is if everybody has nuclear weapons, then it kind of acts in their minds as sort of a mutual assured destruction aspect. I don't know, but these guys have been actively, really, really promoting this whole nuclear proliferation. The same people that are like, going on about, Putin, which is, he's not a nice guy, but I don't mistake that. But it's, everyone forgets when we're looking at the money laundering aspect of Putin and stuff, is that it goes back to his original partners that put him in power, which were these sort of, fly by night carpetbaggers. A lot of them were involved in things like setting up coups in Vanuatu in the 70s. The worst of the worst of the CIA's community. In fact, not even really the CIA per se. It's what they call living in sin. It's all these sort of overhangers that have sort of, the CIA's utilised them in the past, and they've, in turn made the best of that. But they're obviously very, very right-wing neoconservatives. So a lot of those guys involved in that's origins, and again, it's sort of reminding me of that situation where they found this New Zealand leased aircraft plane in South Korea, but loaded up with North Korean weapons, and that was heading to the Middle East. And again, it's all part of this whole trade where countries that are wanting to get particular components that are hard to get, but have a big stock of conventional weapons, are sort of doing a trade of, big, bulky, small arms for small little chips, which are essential for making nuclear weapons or long-range missiles or anything that's, seriously weapon beyond pop guns. So that again zoomed us right back into those Vanuatu banks. And remember, again, the point is these shady Vanuatu banks were sort of set up by the people that were behind the neocons that in 1998 called for the new American Pacific Century, which was largely by basically antagonizing people, so then they could turn around and say, "Oh, they're terrorists," and wham, we're going to get them. The same people that brought us weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Same people that are selling this war now in the Ukraine. And again, my take on the war in the Ukraine, which is basically Cold War, it's actually very much goes back to that Odessa philosophy of effectively playing both sides against each other. So it's a little bit easier to explain in terms of China, is that we look at China and think, China's on the Russian side. Well, no, China is a collection of families, and you have a group in the center that are, let's call them Maoists, in the sense that they believe in the singular one strongman leader like Putin, and they don't want to be part of this whole international corporate globalization model. And then you've got the people that are around that are softer, the progressive liberals. And again, what I found in my investigation of the money laundering is that the money that's going into China, that's affiliated with all these sort of things that I've been investigating over the years, it's not necessarily going into, even the companies, some of those companies are Chinese state-owned families, but it doesn't necessarily, corporations, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the controlling interests are actually the Chinese state. Again, we've got these progressive families, which we find are actually the kind of the partner in crime for a lot of this money disappearing into China and then linking into things like money going into the cartels, the Somalia and the Russian mafia, just like the sort of thing. Similar, the same thing as their money methodologies and the routes by which they pass through, again, have lots of overlap. So that's from that aspect of it there. And the last article which I read, which I recommend, we'll just try and put that one down there. There's actually a very good thing there about the economic cooperation between Russia and North Korea. And I'll just back that too. So about that whole money laundering aspect of it, this is not the first time that we've actually seen this sort of Western North Korean collaboration. If you remember the time when Nikki Hager basically was looking at these guys that were, they'd been saying that there was the Security Intelligence Service of people in the SIS, that there was money laundering going. Operation Weasel's the one that you want to look at, but that was Oliver North. And effectively what they were actually looking at was actually getting scientists and people out of North Korea, and they were largely, again, working in cooperation with the Chinese, and that was Jack Stubbs. And again, a lot of the things that I've been sort of peripherally on the range over the last couple of months, that crew sort of keeps on. I'm never not quite getting the front door, but I'm always coming really, really close within at least, the front gate. So again, a lot of the same sort of similar players, but when you actually looked at the people involved in it, it was like the whole idea was supposedly was like, they were stopping money laundering, but in actual fact, it looked like the opposite very thing, where they were actually facilitating money laundering, which is very much usual protocol. If you look at Oliver North and his sort of claims about what role he played in the murder of drug enforcement agent Kiki Karamiya, pronunciation may not be perfect because it's been a while since I remember the name. He said one thing, and then when we actually got all the hardware out of his diary in Congress, it actually was absolutely the reverse. So that may be the case here. But the one I'm finding very interesting here is this article here, which is the New Caledonian, it's the PacificJournal.com, New Caledonian independence threaten the French state. And the article here basically, again, is it's like all this other thing is the sale of nickel plant to the Swiss trader to figure. And then this basically disappears again as associated with the Korean metallurgist, Korean zinc. And so again, basically what they're doing is they're taking conflict, ethnic disputes, and utilising this to basically kind of fund groups to actually, push their own commercial agenda. Something very, very similar was pointed at Kelvin Alps, the CEO of Counterspin, for his activity in the Solomon Islands, where he was actually partnered up with Leonce Kelly, the guy that effectively played a very significant part in the constitutional coup d'etat backed by the CIA of the Whitlam government in the 1970s, which about the time when all these carpetbaggers started turning up in the Pacific and establishing these, Pacific money laundering things, and they disappeared into the World Anti-Communist League. We had Taiwanese and the Moonies getting fake passports and just shady stuff. And of course, in the middle of all of that stuff, of course, state secrets. One was talking again about Proc Bank, Russian bank. Lots of New Zealand, at least Ross Morant, former arms dealer, was on board of that. You had Ian Robinson, former dairy executive to the Far East and operating out of Russian Proc banks. Two of them were former KGB officers. And when I partnered up with those, looked deep into Proc Bank in my two books, we find out that actually they're part of the consortium Willnet Holdings, which included Chinese state-owned companies, and it also included people like Fay Rich White and Berkshire Hathaway, which is Disney. So a lot of these sort of people that are now pushing the agenda, sort of started pushing the agenda, which is now being kind of promoted by companies like BlackRock. So again, BlackRock wins from the sale of oil from the Ukrainian situation in terms of the debt that it's creating, very much involved in the weapons industry, so again gets a lot of trade from that. And then when we sort of start to look at who actually owns the land in the sort of post-perestroika USSR world in Ukraine, 71% of the companies, 71% of the arable land owned by 10 major companies, 9 basically subsidiaries of BlackRock, 1 basically another one of these Chinese state-owned companies that it's tricky to actually work out who is the leading people behind it, because you've got to get a little bit more au fait or familiar with the sort of the long-term politics of the inner state of the Chinese Politburo, which is something I'm actually really only catching up with. Like when I did my international politics in Canterbury University, China actually wasn't. I mean, we talked about it, but we never examined it. So I have as much. Every time I'm looking at my world political model, I'm always consciously aware of the fact that I've got this big black hole in my knowledge gap about China, and then I still have to go away and dig and fossick. And it's like colonial language. If you know it, then you speak it fluently. But if you don't, then you've really got to sort of work different parts of your brain that you're not used to. Okay, so yeah, because that basically, cut a long story short, this article here, which is New Caledonian independence threatened the French state, effectively is kind of like a repeat of the whole Proc Bank, not Proc Bank, the Phoenix Foundation, and not to be confused with Kelvin Alps has a mining company called the Phoenix International, which and then there is also a Phoenix Foundation, which is actually listed as a trust, which is one fold. We got that one disappears into Switzerland, into one of these buildings. It comes very, very close to Fay Rich White. All these these guys I was telling you about beforehand, but I can't quite get the link there. Very similar profile, similar things, kind of like making themselves out more legitimate. That sort of thing where they put up a website and then sort of borrow logos from other international NGOs that they want to make themselves look better with, but they're quite a little bit blurred, so you kind of go, oh, that doesn't really look legitimate. The other Phoenix Foundation disappears into the Arizona Masonic Lodge, which is significant from two viewpoints, because we actually have got a photograph of Kelvin Alp standing in that particular building with some very right-wing neoconservative types of people, but also that kind of area and that base, again, was a central hub, part of John Klebb's World Anti-Communist League. So again, what we're seeing is not a perfect matchup, but we're seeing a lot of the same familiar names just popping up out again. The final kind of guess part that situation of this thing disappearing at the just saying the Phoenix Foundation, which to kind of quantify was actually set up by basically a bunch of right-wing people. Again, lots of links to the World Anti-Communist League, lots of links to the Nazis. Actually, oddly enough, there was quite a strong Israeli or sort of Jewish component at that time, and then you also had sort of like links that went into Amsterdam. You start to go back to kind of like old school Odessa money. And then, of course, the other people that were pied up with that were on affiliations that were people like Adnan Khashoggi and Robert Vesco, these sort of Las Vegas carpetbaggers, where, again, a lot of the money that was seen in New Zealand, like the Riverview Trust, which is the top company that was in charge of Wairau Water, which is when all the Putin Russians poured into New Zealand. They were trying to buy up water and get involved in the America's Cup. And when they left, it was all like, oh, Putin's bets, but like if you actually follow the paper trail, yeah, they were there. That's no denying that. But above them, we find ourselves disappearing back into Las Vegas and Utah, into nominee company banks, and that are, again, nominee company shareholders using very much, we see very familiar in these SP trading scams and these Fonseca Panama names. One of the things that's actually been saying to my London consultant, or the company I do a bit of consultancy for, is that, we've got this sort of thing which we're scratching our heads over, which is a lot of the people that sort of are the front people that are the ones that are getting the names up there, they're pretty low level people. Like, they're basically, if they're hedge fund people, then they're really like New Jersey chop shop boys who would want to be that, but they're really at the bottom, not really allowed in the old boys' gates. And then suddenly they go from being nobody losers to like having massive amounts of money. But, then there's these other people who are above them. And there is, again, a lot of work to be done to kind of really flush out. I mean, there's common sense, and then there's, however, just the fact you've got to connect these things and cross your T's and dot your I's so that you can't really, be shot down the road later on. So these Russian guys disappeared into say, these Las Vegas and Utah banks, which lead us right back to the same people here. And this is the same sort of thing. And of course, the very, very final bit is that one of the things people have been talking about, the Phoenix Foundation came here in New Zealand in 1973, not New Zealand, Minerva, which is the little micro-state that they tried to make out of a reef, and then they did Vanuatu in the center was 78, and then their people proceeded to be in every single Papua New Guinea, the Fiji coup, all these same people are always supplying the weapons, always on the peripherals of this, with 1 degrees of separation. And it was really, at the end of the day, always basically about the pursuit of mining minerals. So again, a lot of the stuff where I'm actually heading towards and upcoming with my speaking tour is really talking about the coming of the special economic zone and how New Zealand's mineral resources have been, realised a long time ago. And there's been basically a blueprint for all of the South Pacific, Western Australia, Chile, to effectively kind of dismantle those democracies and effectively make them very, very vulnerable to the the goals of the mining mega corporations, which again it's this thing of where we are with the resources, which is we have oil which produces carbon, and the alternative appears to be mining the hell out of the planet in methodology ways which are not carbon neutral either. So it's a bit of a Ponzi scheme there. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be going to electrics. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be phasing out on fuel, but I'm saying there is a huge amount of greenwashing and laundering that gets accepted by people who, if they knew a little bit of the history a bit further, they might be a little bit more questioning, and we might be able to root some of these rat bags who are effectively greenwashing and image laundering for us. So that's my little piece for shipping news number 13, and that is just the context of that story. Is we're not saying that this. I mean, I really don't know the details of these couple of young kids that were killed in Manawa very deeply. I looked at the company that turned up in terms of the place that she's hiding out, and I've looked at their profile and I've gone, very, very curious. And if nothing else, I think that that's really what I wanted people to talk about, was the focus of who this company is and what that tells us about what's going on. What the direct link is to these two children in a suitcase, I don't know. And I said I will have a little look around. But sometimes, I think sometimes we forget the point that you can come across a story, and the story really is a lead into something else. So, we're not here to solve the armchair of, who murdered the two children. We'll let others, we will actually have a look at a little more details to see if that flushes anything actually out. But my focus on this is actually looking at the zinc company, and then all the connections that brings out in terms of basically the network of pariah rogue stakes to be able to actually be involved in this trade, which is largely driving or hyper accentuating the Cold War conflicts, which again the various parties can actually use to play one side off the other. So that's that's really my main spectrum on this particular area. And of course, the other aspect, of course, is just the politics of the whole energy, and of course this money laundering aspect, which again is once I started looking into this, it didn't take me long to actually find some things which were actually really, really significant, helping me understand other parts of the puzzle. So have a nice day. Enjoy shipping news number 13, and we'll catch you on the flip side.